The grand estate was quiet, as it usually was. Olivia, the heiress to a vast family fortune, moved through her home in silence, her world defined by what she saw and touched. Her deafness had once made her life feel like a calm sea, free from the noise of the outside world. But recently, that silence had begun to feel unsettling, like a shadow lurking in the corners. Olivia's life hadn't always been this way. She had once been full of joy and laughter, surrounded by her parents and the bustling, comforting warmth of her family's legacy. As their only child, she was cherished deeply, a beloved figure known for her beauty, grace, and kindness. Her parents had taught her generosity and loyalty, grounding her in their values. And though they had once disapproved of Henry, her choice of husband, they had eventually given their blessing, wanting nothing more than their daughter's happiness. But their acceptance had been short-lived. A few months after her marriage, tragedy struck. Her parents had been killed in a sudden car accident, leaving Olivia alone to carry on the family legacy. The grief had left her feeling hollow, and she had clung to Henry even more. He became her support, her anchor, the one person she could turn to. At first, Henry had been the loving, attentive man she thought she'd married. His warmth filled the silent void her parents had left behind. She had loved him deeply, trusting him completely. But now things felt different. Henry had grown distant, often taking long business trips, spending hours in the study with the door closed, and speaking in low tones on his phone. Olivia began to notice things she hadn't before. The way he avoided her gaze, the way he seemed distracted even when he was with her. Little details that hinted at secrets she was not meant to know. In moments of quiet reflection, her parents' warnings echoed in her mind. They had worried about her marrying a man of such a different background. They had feared that Henry might care more for the fortune she had inherited than for the woman she was. But back then, Olivia had dismissed their concerns. She'd seen only Henry's charm, his wit, the way he made her laugh, even when she felt lost. Now, as she watched him leave the house in a rush one evening, her heart ached. She wondered if she had been wrong. Could it be that she had been too quick to trust, blinded by love? Her parents were gone, and she was alone with her questions, her world as silent as ever. With each passing day, the sense of doubt grew. She tried to dismiss it as loneliness or insecurity, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It clung to her, whispering that something was wrong, that the man she had trusted with her heart was hiding something from her. Several months later, Olivia found herself sitting in a sterile, brightly lit medical office. She had agreed to try a new medical procedure, a groundbreaking technique that offered the possibility of restoring her hearing. Though cautious, Olivia allowed herself a small glimmer of hope. After years of living in silence, the thought of hearing again was like a far-off dream finally coming into reach. After the procedure, Olivia could hardly contain herself. For the first time in years, the world was alive with sound. She could hear the gentle hum of voices in the hospital hallway, the rustling of leaves outside, even her own footsteps as she rushed through the hospital doors. The joy of hearing again made her feel as if she were walking on air. The first person she wanted to share this miracle with was Henry. Olivia returned to their mansion, eager to surprise him with the life-changing news. As she walked up the steps, she heard a faint voice coming from Henry's study. She paused, recognizing his voice, low and intimate, as he spoke to someone over the phone. "Yes, baby, I miss you too," he murmured, his tone soft and affectionate. "I'll find a way for us to be together." She has no idea about any of this. Olivia froze in her tracks, the warmth in her heart turning cold. The thrill she'd felt moments ago vanished, replaced by a sickening sense of dread. She felt like she was intruding on a private moment, but the voice on the other end of the line was a stranger's, soft, flirtatious, laughing in response to Henry's promises. Taking a deep breath, Olivia stepped into the room, her face carefully blank as she watched him. Henry glanced up, startled, but quickly composed himself, giving her a relaxed smile. He continued his conversation, speaking even more freely, oblivious to the fact that she could now hear every word. "I'll call you later," he said smoothly, his gaze fixed on her, yet his tone still dripping with affection for the woman on the other end. "Yes, I know, soon. Very soon." Olivia's heart raced, every fiber of her being tense with a mix of shock, betrayal, and heartbreak. She kept her expression neutral, fighting to hide the horror that must have been flickering in her eyes. Henry hung up and slipped his phone into his pocket. Then he turned to her with a soft smile, using sign language to communicate, as he always did. "Just talking to some business associates," he signed smoothly, his expression calm and convincing. "I was handling a few things for you at the company like I always do." Olivia felt a sharp sting as his hands moved, each lie settling heavily within her. How many times had he told her he was handling business for her? How often had he used sign language to shield his lies, speaking to her with perfect calm as he spun stories? And had she always missed the truth simply because she couldn't hear? She forced herself to nod, keeping her expression neutral as her mind raced with the reality of his betrayal. She had regained her hearing, but now she felt as if her world had shattered around her. The Henry she thought she knew, the man she trusted completely, was now a stranger, weaving a hidden life behind her back. Standing there, watching him lie to her with such ease, an idea began to form in her mind. If Henry thought she was still deaf, maybe she could use that to her advantage. Maybe she could find out what he was hiding, see how deep his betrayal went. The pain was fresh, raw, but she held her composure, determined to be patient and see where this deception would lead. From that moment on, Olivia decided she would pretend to still be deaf. She would listen carefully, watching for any signs of his hidden life, uncovering the secrets he thought she couldn't hear. As she left the study, the mansion suddenly felt cold and hollow. But as terrified as she was by what she had just heard, Olivia steeled herself. She was no longer the woman who blindly trusted. She was someone else now. Someone who was ready to face the truth, however painful it might be. It was a rainy afternoon when Henry brought a young woman into the mansion, introducing her as Layla, Olivia's new caregiver. Layla was bright-eyed, with an eager smile and a soft, gentle manner. Henry explained that Layla was there to assist Olivia with daily activities, especially now that he would be occupied with business matters and frequently away. He assured Olivia this was for her benefit, but she felt a shiver run through her. Layla quickly settled into the household, and it didn't take long for Olivia to sense that something was off. She noticed the subtle glances exchanged between Layla and Henry, the lingering smiles that seemed a little too familiar. Layla was respectful, almost overly so, and she often signed to Olivia instead of speaking, making it clear that she too knew sign language. Olivia had seen no reason to question her presence, at least not openly. She would play along for now, pretending to be oblivious to whatever plans they were hatching. It wasn't long before Layla and Henry became comfortable around Olivia, confident in their belief that she was still deaf. Their conversations grew bolder, casual exchanges laced with dangerous intentions. Olivia would sit in the corner of the room, pretending to read or watch the world outside while they spoke openly in front of her. One evening, as Olivia sat nearby, the two of them stood in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones. "We just need to declare her unfit," Henry murmured. "If she's mentally unstable, the estate can be transferred to me for management." Layla leaned in closer. "But what about her will? I thought you said she had everything secured." Henry laughed softly, a chilling sound that sent a shiver down Olivia's spine. "The will is old. Once she's declared unfit, we can override it. Besides, once she's gone, no one will be left to challenge us." Olivia's fingers tightened around the book she was holding, her heart racing as she tried to keep her face expressionless. The casual way they discussed her finances, her very life, made her feel like an object, something they could manipulate and discard without a second thought. But it didn't stop there. Over the following days, Henry and Layla began plotting openly, unafraid to discuss their schemes right in front of her. As she watched them from across the room, pretending to be lost in thought, Olivia overheard them exploring different ways to make her disappear. "We could say she fell," Layla suggested one day. "The staircases here are steep enough. If she takes a bad fall..." Henry shook his head. "Too obvious. We need it to look natural. I've increased her life insurance so it needs to seem accidental." Olivia's hands shook, her mind racing as she realized the depths of their plan. They weren't just trying to take over her finances. They wanted her gone, permanently. She had to bite her lip to keep from reacting, terrified that they might see through her act if she let even a flicker of emotion cross her face. The attempts began subtly at first, small things that others might overlook. One evening she found a glass of wine on her bedside table, an unusual gift from Henry. But when she brought the glass to her lips, she caught a faint, bitter smell and set it aside, her stomach churning with the suspicion that something was wrong. A few days later, as she walked down the stairs, she felt herself stumble as her hand slipped against the polished banister. Looking closer, she noticed it had been slicked with a faint, oily substance. She steadied herself, swallowing the fear that threatened to rise, aware that any misstep could cost her life. Each day, Henry and Layla grew bolder, discussing their plans openly in front of her. They spoke about her money, her will, and even her family's assets, calculating exactly how much they would stand to gain if she were out of the picture. "If we take a trip," Henry said one afternoon, "maybe somewhere remote, where accidents are easier to explain. No one would think twice if something happened to her." Layla nodded, her eyes cold. "We should make sure it's a clean job, Henry. No loose ends." Olivia's heart pounded. The life she thought she'd known was slipping away, replaced by a horrifying reality. The man she had loved, the person she had trusted, was now planning her death as though it were nothing more than a business arrangement. And Layla, who had been brought into her life as a caregiver, was complicit in every detail. As she sat through their discussions, maintaining her silence, Olivia felt her fear give way to resolve. She had to act. She couldn't afford to be passive or wait for a lucky break. If she didn't find help soon, she knew there might not be a chance to save herself. But whom could she trust? Her life had become insular, her friends distant, especially after her hearing loss. Henry had been her primary support, and his betrayal left her feeling isolated and desperate. But one thing was clear. She needed to confide in someone, and soon. Keeping up the act would buy her time, but if she didn't act quickly, she might not have any time left. The grand ballroom was alive with music and laughter, a swirl of colors and glittering lights as elegantly dressed guests mingled and exchanged pleasantries. Olivia moved through the crowd alongside Henry, a polite smile on her face, though her mind was anything but settled. She felt as if she were moving through a dream, performing the role she'd grown used to, yet hiding the storm of emotions beneath her calm exterior. Henry soon left her side and got himself busy with God knows what. She honestly did not care. She was glad he was gone. Tonight would be different, she signed. As Olivia scanned the room, her gaze landed on a tall, familiar figure standing near the edge of the crowd. She blinked in surprise, her heart catching in her chest. It was Austin. They had been inseparable as children, best friends who shared every secret and adventure. But his family had moved to the United States when they were still young, and they had eventually lost touch. Now, standing before her wasn't the teenage boy she remembered, but a man who had grown into striking features, with a calm strength in his eyes and an easy confidence that made her heart flutter. Austin noticed her too, and his look of surprise softened into a warm smile. He made his way over, pausing just as he reached her, as though taking in the reality of seeing her after all these years. "Olivia," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "It's been a long time." She smiled, feeling a rush of emotions she hadn't expected. "Austin, I can't believe it's really you." He extended his hand, but before she knew it, he gently pulled her into a hug. She returned the embrace, surprised by the comfort she felt. When they stepped back, she was struck by how much he had changed. The years had only made him more composed, more strikingly handsome. She felt her cheeks flush slightly under his gaze. "You look incredible," he said, his voice sincere. "You're just as I remember, though somehow even more graceful." Olivia laughed softly, shaking her head. "Thank you, and I could say the same for you. You're hardly the Austin I remember. You've changed." Austin chuckled, his eyes warm. "I hope that's a good thing. A few years in the States, a bit of life experience." It does that to a person. They began to talk, slipping into a rhythm as natural as it had been in their childhood. Olivia marveled at how much he had grown, his words filled with quiet confidence and strength that felt both comforting and safe. The ease of their old friendship returned, and she found herself smiling more genuinely than she had in a long time. As they shared stories of the past, Olivia noticed Austin's hands moving almost unconsciously, signing certain words. Her heart warmed at the familiar gesture, but she gently touched his arm to stop him. "You don't have to sign, Austin," she said softly. I can hear you." Austin's eyes widened in surprise, his expression softening with awe. "You can hear?" he asked, his voice filled with amazement. She nodded, glancing around the room before leaning in slightly. "I had a procedure recently and it worked. But Henry doesn't know. He still thinks I'm deaf." Austin's expression shifted, a look of serious concern crossing his face as he absorbed her words. She could tell he was putting the pieces together, sensing there was more to her situation than she was letting on. But instead of pressing her, he simply nodded, his gaze filled with quiet understanding. "All right," he said gently. "Then we'll keep it between us." She smiled gratefully, her heart swelling with relief at his easy acceptance. A question came to mind, and she couldn't help but ask, "Austin, how did you know about my deafness? The last time we were together, I was still all right." Austin looked at her, a slight smile playing at the corner of his lips. "I may have looked you up," he admitted softly, his gaze steady and warm. "I wanted to know how you were doing, and I learned about what happened." Olivia felt her cheeks flush again, surprised by the genuine affection in his words. They both smiled, a silent understanding passing between them. Meanwhile, across the room, Henry was in another corner, standing close to Layla. As they exchanged a few words, Henry's hand lingered on her waist, his fingers brushing her cheeks. He had successfully brought his mistress into the house, and he was basking in the joy, even asking her to meet him at the gala. They leaned close, sharing a smile that was far more intimate than it should have been in public, but they knew they had hidden well. No one was watching. For them, these moments away from Olivia were a careless display of their hidden romance. But Olivia was oblivious to their tryst, absorbed in her conversation with Austin. As they spoke, she felt a renewed sense of peace, as though being with him allowed her to be herself for the first time in years. They moved to a quieter corner, away from the crowd, continuing their conversation. "Olivia, if you ever need anything, you know you can count on me." No questions asked. A faint flicker of emotion crossed her face, and she looked away, touched by his words. Here was someone who saw through her polite smile, who sensed the weight she carried without her having to say a word. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Thank you, Austin. It's really good to see you again." They stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the ballroom fading around them. Olivia felt a renewed strength, a faint glimmer of hope that she hadn't allowed herself in months. She hadn't yet shared the darkness surrounding her life, but she felt certain that if anyone could help her, it was Austin. When the night finally drew to a close, Austin walked her to the exit, his hand lingering briefly on her arm as he said goodbye. She watched him go, feeling a surge of gratitude and relief. For the first time in months, Olivia felt she had someone she could trust, someone who might help her find a way to escape the trap that had slowly closed around her. After their encounter at the gala, Austin could barely get Olivia out of his mind. Seeing her again had stirred up feelings he had kept buried for years, feelings that he hadn't even fully admitted to himself. Olivia had always been more than just a childhood friend. She had been his first love, even if he had never told her. Years ago, when Austin's family announced they were moving to the United States, he'd been devastated. Olivia had been his confidant, his partner in every adventure, and his heart ached at the thought of leaving her behind. But he hadn't told her about his feelings. He had convinced himself that their friendship was too important, and he didn't want to make things awkward before he left. Even after he moved, he never forgot about her. She stayed in his heart as he navigated the challenges of a new life abroad. And no matter how many years passed, she remained his closest friend, even if only in his memories. As they both grew older, Austin would occasionally search for her, wondering how she was doing and if she was happy. When he finally learned about her life, he had been hit by a mixture of emotions. He had found out that she had married a man named Henry, a man from a different background who had seemingly won her heart. Although he felt the sharp pain of loss, Austin told himself to be happy for her. If she had found love, he could live with the fact that he'd never been able to tell her how he felt. But then he discovered something that struck him deeply. Shortly after he'd left, Olivia had been in a terrible drowning accident, one that had left her deaf. The news had shaken him to his core, and he found himself filled with regret for not being there for her during such a difficult time. He also learned that her parents, whom she'd been so close to, had passed away in a tragic accident not long after her marriage to Henry. The loneliness she must have felt haunted him, and he wished more than anything that he could have offered her the comfort she deserved. In response, Austin began to take sign language lessons. It became his silent promise to himself that one day, if he ever saw her again, he would be able to communicate with her, to be there for her in a way that he hadn't been able to before. He practiced tirelessly, hoping to be ready whenever fate brought them back together. But years passed, and he kept Olivia in his heart as a memory he treasured, yet one he thought was closed forever. Then, as fate would have it, he had run into her at the gala. Seeing her again, hearing her laugh, and sharing stories of their childhood had felt like a miracle. And when she told him she had regained her hearing but was pretending to be deaf around her husband, he began to sense that her marriage wasn't what it appeared to be. The thought made his blood boil. Henry, the man who had promised to cherish her, was hiding things from her. It made him angry, and he blamed himself for not seeking her out sooner. But now that he was here, he would make sure he was there for her in every way possible. Over the following days, Austin made an effort to reconnect with Olivia, meeting her often under the guise of catching up and rekindling their friendship. They met in her office or for quiet lunches, and each time Olivia seemed a little more open, a little more comfortable sharing her life with him. One morning, as they sat in a quiet corner of a cafe, Olivia finally broke down and told him everything. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she shared the awful truth. How Henry and her caregiver, Layla, were conspiring against her, speaking openly about her finances and plotting to declare her mentally unfit to seize control of her estate. Austin listened intently, his face tightening with anger and pain as she described the ways Henry had lied to her, the casual conversations he'd had with Layla right in front of her, thinking she couldn't hear. "He's so confident," Olivia said quietly, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "They both are. They talk about my life, my family's business as if I'm not even there. They think they're being clever, that I'll never find out. They've even started talking about ways to end my life, Austin. I don't know how much time I have before they actually try." Austin felt his heart break at the sight of her fear. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his own, a fierce determination lighting his eyes. "Olivia," he said, his voice steady. "You don't have to go through this alone. I'm here now, and I'm going to help you." She looked up at him, relief flickering in her gaze. "I don't know what to do, Austin. I've felt so alone in this. I don't know who to trust." "You can trust me," he said firmly, "and together we'll find a way to expose them. Henry and Layla won't get away with this." Austin's mind was already racing with ideas. He knew that to prove Henry and Layla's treachery, they needed solid evidence. He decided the best course of action was to bring in someone with expertise, someone who could help them gather the proof they needed. "I know a private investigator," Austin said after a moment of thought. "He's trustworthy, discreet, and excellent at what he does. We'll start by having him monitor Henry and Layla, collecting whatever he can on their plans. This way we'll have a way to prove what they're doing." Olivia nodded, the flicker of hope in her eyes growing stronger. "Thank you, Austin. I don't know what I would do without you." He smiled softly, his hand giving hers a reassuring squeeze. "You'll never have to find out, Olivia. I'm here, and I'll be by your side until this is over." As they parted ways that day, Austin's determination only grew. He was more certain than ever that he needed to protect Olivia, to do whatever it took to keep her safe. He would make sure Henry and Layla paid for what they'd done, and he would be there for Olivia, no matter what the future held. In the coming days, they set their plan into motion. Austen arranged a meeting with the private investigator, explaining the situation and the need for absolute discretion. The investigator agreed to take on the case, promising to keep a close eye on Henry and Layla and to gather any evidence of their schemes. With Austen's presence and support, Olivia felt a renewed strength. She was no longer alone in her fight, and as their friendship deepened, she began to feel the faint stirrings of something more. A warmth, a trust, and a connection that she had thought she'd lost long ago. And Austen, for his part, was determined to do whatever it took to protect her, to be there for her in a way he hadn't been able to before. He blamed himself for not being in her life sooner, but he knew one thing for certain. From that moment on, he would be there for Olivia in every way possible. As the days passed, Henry and Layla continued to plot openly in Olivia's presence, assuming she was oblivious to their schemes. But in their arrogance, they became careless, believing their plan was foolproof. The tension in the mansion thickened, Olivia maintaining her calm demeanor while secretly feeling every hair-raising chill of their whispered plans. With Austen by her side and the private investigator already gathering evidence, she felt stronger and more determined to see this through. But meanwhile, a seed of doubt had started to grow in Layla's mind. She had noticed subtle moments where Olivia seemed too aware, too perceptive. It was as if she understood things no deaf person could. Small, almost imperceptible reactions that stirred suspicion. Layla brought her concerns to Henry one evening as they spoke privately in the study. "You know, I think there's something strange about Olivia," Layla said, her voice low. "I don't think she's as deaf as she seems." Henry frowned, looking skeptical. "What are you talking about? The woman's been deaf for years. Why would you think she's suddenly able to hear?" Layla shrugged, her brow furrowed. "It's just little things, the way she moves or reacts sometimes, and it's almost like she knows what we're planning. Maybe I'm imagining it, but what if she's faking it?" Henry laughed, brushing off her concerns. "You're overthinking it, Layla. Olivia has no idea. She's too trusting, too clueless. If she even suspected what we were doing, she wouldn't be acting so calmly." But Layla's suspicions lingered, and in the following days she became more vigilant, watching Olivia closely and testing her reactions. Their mistrust took a dangerous turn one evening when they decided it was time to make a direct attempt on Olivia's life. Over dinner, Henry and Layla had openly discussed an accident, confident that Olivia couldn't hear them. They planned to release the large crystal chandelier hanging over the dining table, intending for it to fall directly onto her. The following evening, the trap was set. Henry and Layla watched Olivia closely as she entered the dining room. They waited until she was seated at the head of the table, right under the chandelier, and then, with a subtle nod, Layla went to the switch, preparing to release it. But at that exact moment, Olivia bent down, reaching under the table. She stayed there, claiming she had dropped her fork, her calm demeanor masking the tension in her heart. Layla, already primed to release the chandelier, pulled the lever just as Olivia's head disappeared beneath the table. With a deafening crash, the chandelier shattered across the table, glass and crystal scattering everywhere. Olivia slowly raised her head, feigning shock as she looked at the mess. She could feel their eyes on her, a mixture of horror and suspicion as they realized she had just dodged what was meant to be a fatal blow. Henry and Layla exchanged a look, their earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty. Henry could feel a gnawing doubt creeping in. Maybe Layla had been right. Maybe Olivia wasn't as deaf as she seemed. If that were the case, their plans were at far greater risk than they'd thought. Olivia, meanwhile, was already making her own moves. She knew that confronting Henry directly would be reckless, but she needed to push him to reveal his true colors in front of others. So she arranged a meeting with the board of directors of her family's company, calling for a video conference with Henry under the pretense of needing his input on several key decisions. She knew that catching him off guard was her best chance. As the video call began, Henry answered, looking smugly casual, unaware that the board members were also present on the other side. To Olivia's grim satisfaction, Henry was in a compromising situation. Layla was hiding at a safe distance behind him, but also making side comments since Olivia could not hear her. Both of them seemed unaware of the call's importance, and Henry, believing that Olivia was as clueless as ever, made no effort to act professionally. "Henry," Olivia said calmly, her voice projecting the authority she'd honed over the years. "We're discussing the latest proposals and your management over the last few months. I thought it would be important for you to be present." Henry's expression flickered, a faint annoyance crossing his face. He glanced at Layla, who simply shrugged, giving him an amused smile. He probably thought it was just another moment Olivia wouldn't understand, a chance to humor her as he'd done in the past. Unbeknownst to Henry, the board members were watching his every move, growing more unsettled by the scene on their screens. Olivia remained composed, patiently observing, waiting for Henry to say something incriminating. As the meeting progressed, Henry's tone grew increasingly dismissive, answering her questions with an air of impatience, his hand gesturing toward Layla. And then, in a moment of sheer arrogance, he muttered something to Layla about finally taking control of things and making sure the old will becomes irrelevant. Olivia's eyes flicked to the board members, who exchanged glances, their suspicions growing. One of the directors cleared his throat. "Henry, I think we should discuss these matters more directly. Some of your comments raise concerns about your commitment to the company's values." Henry's expression turned stony, realizing too late that he'd been caught off guard. Olivia maintained her calm, her heart racing beneath the surface as she watched his mask slip. She'd exposed his true character to those who mattered most, and Henry could sense that his grip on her company was starting to unravel. Meanwhile, the private investigator hired by Austin had begun his work, gathering incriminating evidence against Henry and Layla. Every conversation, every plan they discussed was recorded meticulously. Olivia received regular updates, her determination hardening with each new detail the investigator uncovered. The web of betrayal was more complex than she'd thought, and with each discovery her resolve to see justice served only grew stronger. Austin, too, had become a steadfast presence in her life. They met frequently, his quiet support helping her hold steady through the ordeal. His anger over what Henry and Layla were putting her through had only intensified, and he felt a growing responsibility to protect her from harm. "Olivia," he said one afternoon as they reviewed the investigator's findings, "you don't have to go through this alone. Whatever it takes, we'll expose them. They won't get away with this." A faint smile crossed her face, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you, Austin. I don't know what I'd do without you." Together they began piecing together a plan that would expose Henry and Layla once and for all, knowing that every step brought them closer to the truth and closer to freedom from the danger that had haunted Olivia's life for far too long. The tension within the mansion had become almost unbearable. Olivia moved about with a calm mask, pretending to be oblivious to the scheming around her. But every day, her suspicions grew, and her resolve to expose Henry and Layla intensified. As the days passed, however, Olivia began to see cracks in Layla's carefully crafted persona. One afternoon, Olivia overheard Layla speaking in a low, affectionate tone on her phone. At first, Olivia assumed she was speaking to Henry, which filled her with a mix of anger and disgust. But as she listened closer, she noticed something strange. Layla's tone was softer, more flirtatious, and the words she used were far too familiar, as if meant for someone she truly adored. Curious, Olivia edged closer to hear more. "I miss you too," Layla murmured, her voice dripping with affection. "I can't wait until we're together again." Olivia's heart raced as she processed Layla's words. This wasn't Henry. Layla had a secret lover, someone she was clearly plotting with on the side. She felt a chill run down her spine. Could it be that Layla wasn't just using her position as a caregiver to help Henry steal her fortune? Was she using Henry as well, plotting to take everything for herself? The realization left Olivia feeling both horrified and strangely vindicated. Her mind raced with questions. How much did Layla's lover know? Did they plan to leave Henry behind once they'd achieved their goal? The betrayal felt layered, tangled in ways she hadn't fully anticipated, but it opened a new door of possibilities. If Layla was playing both sides, it might be easier to unravel the schemes they'd laid against her. As if the web of betrayal wasn't complex enough, a new discovery struck even closer to home. Late one evening, Olivia overheard Henry speaking with her cousin in the study. Both men believed she was deaf, unaware that she could hear every word they spoke. "I'm telling you, she's incapable of handling this fortune," her cousin said, his tone dismissive. "If you really care about keeping things within the family, you'll find a way to take control. She's, well, fragile, Henry. Not fit to manage it all." Henry chuckled, a bitter edge to his laugh. "Oh, trust me, I'm doing everything I can. Once we establish her mental incompetence, the inheritance will be in the right hands. Our hands." Olivia's stomach twisted as she listened to their conversation, each word feeling like a knife. Her own family, her cousin, was conspiring against her with Henry, the man she had once trusted more than anyone. The betrayal ran deeper than she'd feared, and the realization left her feeling vulnerable and exposed in ways she hadn't imagined. How long had her cousin been conspiring with Henry? Did others in her family know? Struggling to contain her emotions, Olivia retreated to her room, feeling the weight of the betrayal pressing down on her. This wasn't just a plot between her husband and his lover. It was something far darker, with her own family eyeing her fortune as if it were a prize, not the legacy her parents had entrusted to her. The next morning, Olivia arranged to meet Austin, her only safe harbor in this storm of betrayal. She met him at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes and ears, and once they were seated, she began to share her latest discoveries. "Austin," she began, her voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of pain. "I overheard something last night. Henry and my cousin. They were talking about my inheritance, about how I'm unfit to handle it. My own family is part of this, Austin. They want to take everything." Austin's face darkened, his jaw clenching as he processed her words. "Olivia, this is worse than we thought. If your family is involved, this changes everything." She nodded, her expression weary, yet resolute. "It does. I don't know how many people are in on it, or how long it's been going on, but it's clear now that this isn't just about Henry and Layla. There are layers to this, and I need to know exactly who's behind it." Austin reached across the table, his hand covering hers with a comforting warmth. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Olivia. I'll speak with the investigator and give him these new leads to follow. We'll track every connection, every hidden ally they might have." A surge of gratitude and something more filled Olivia's heart. She looked at him, finding solace in his steady gaze, the unwavering determination that matched her own. Austin had become her rock, someone she could lean on when her world felt like it was falling apart. "Thank you, Austin," she murmured. "I don't know what I would do without you." He gave her a gentle smile, his hand lingering on hers. "You'll never have to find out, Olivia. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Their connection deepened with every passing day, and Olivia felt her heart beginning to open in ways she hadn't expected. She trusted Austin more than she had trusted anyone in years, and as she looked into his eyes, she felt a warmth, a flicker of feelings she hadn't thought herself capable of experiencing again. It was subtle but undeniable, a quiet kindling of affection that went beyond friendship. Meanwhile, the investigator Austin had hired began to uncover startling details. He followed the leads Olivia had shared, trailing Henry's movements, noting every meeting, every phone call. He captured evidence of Henry's frequent meetups with Layla and tracked the connections between her cousin and other potential allies within Olivia's extended family. The investigator's findings revealed a chilling plot that was even more complex than Olivia had imagined. Hidden bank accounts, secret meetings, and confidential documents hinted at a larger scheme. Every piece of evidence pointed to an intricate plan aimed at stripping Olivia of her inheritance, erasing her from the picture entirely. As Olivia and Austin continued to meet in secret, piecing together the threads of betrayal, their bond only grew stronger. Austin's presence became her anchor, his gentle strength giving her the courage she needed to confront the darkness surrounding her. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope, a warmth that slowly began to replace the chill of betrayal. Austin, too, felt his feelings deepening with each encounter. He was filled with fierce protectiveness, a need to shield Olivia from the harm that had already come too close. The sight of her resilience, her bravery in the face of such deception, only strengthened his resolve to see this through to the end. He knew that he couldn't bear to lose her again, and that this time he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. They both sensed the danger building around them, and with each passing day, the urgency of their mission became clearer. But with every piece of evidence, every whispered conversation and shared glance, they felt the closeness of something else. A new beginning, something deeper and stronger than either had anticipated. The atmosphere in the mansion was growing tense, a subtle game of cat and mouse that Olivia carefully played against Henry and Layla. She knew that her suspicions about them had become more obvious, that her guarded looks and occasional questions had started to make Henry uneasy. And one evening, she saw him finally make his move. As they sat in the study after dinner, Henry sighed dramatically, his face painted with a mix of remorse and regret. Olivia watched him, feeling the familiar sting of distrust, yet she remained silent, waiting for him to speak. "Olivia," he began, his tone heavy. "There's something I've been wanting to tell you. I want to be honest with you about everything. Especially with Layla." Her pulse quickened, but she kept her expression steady, masking the dread creeping up her spine. "What do you mean?" Henry sighed, looking down as if ashamed. "I know what you might think. Layla has been tempting. I'll admit that much. She's young, she's close to you, and maybe I've been too friendly. But I want you to know, Olivia, I would never betray you. Whatever temptation there was, I would never act on it." He reached out, placing a hand on hers in what appeared to be a gesture of reassurance, but Olivia felt the coldness of his touch. She managed a nod, her heart twisting with a strange mixture of anger and confusion. But even as he spoke, she saw something in his eyes, a flicker of calculation, a glimpse of the Henry she'd come to know through his deceit. She realized that this feigned breakup with Layla was his attempt to throw her off his trail, to make her doubt her own suspicions. And though his words stung, she resolved not to be fooled. "Thank you for telling me, Henry," she said softly, her voice betraying nothing. It's good to know where we stand." The next morning, Olivia decided to test just how deep Henry's deception ran. She carefully crafted a fake will, leaving it in the study's drawer, hoping Henry would stumble upon it while pretending to check on her affairs. She intentionally left it half-hidden, the details suggesting that her fortune would be transferred to him in the event of her mental incapacity or death. Within days, she got her answer. One evening, as she quietly moved past the study, she overheard Henry speaking excitedly to Layla. "She's finally come around, Layla," he whispered, his voice filled with greed. "The will clearly state that I get everything once she's gone. It's only a matter of time." Olivia's chest tightened, but she forced herself to remain calm, hiding just out of view. Henry had taken the bait, his greed laid bare. Her plan was working, and with each new piece of the puzzle, she felt herself drawing closer to exposing his betrayal. Meanwhile, Austin was working diligently behind the scenes. As the investigator dug deeper, an unexpected twist emerged. Layla's secret lover wasn't some random stranger, but a prominent businessman known in Olivia's social circles. The investigator uncovered messages and photographs that confirmed their relationship, and Olivia realized she had a unique opportunity. She arranged a meeting with Layla's lover, a man named Richard, who was unaware of her connection to Henry. They met in a quiet, upscale cafe, and when she laid out the truth about Layla's involvement with her husband, his expression turned from shock to outrage. "Layla and Henry," he repeated, his voice barely containing his anger. "She told me she was dedicated to us, that she was only working with you as a caregiver because she needed stability." Olivia nodded sympathetically. "They've been using both of us, Richard. I don't know what Layla has told you, but I believe they're working together to seize my estate." Richard's face darkened as he processed her words, a new determination forming in his eyes. "Thank you for telling me this, Olivia. I had no idea I was being played. I'll help you in any way I can to expose them." They agreed to keep their alliance secret, planning to work together to uncover more of Layla and Henry's dealings. Olivia felt a renewed sense of strength. She was no longer alone in her fight, and with Richard's help, she had another ally who had suffered under Layla's manipulation. As she moved forward with her plan, Olivia found herself spending more and more time with Austin. He was a source of stability, his calm presence helping her regain the strength she needed to keep going. They met in secret, sometimes at the investigator's office to review evidence or in private places where they could talk freely without fear of being overheard. One evening, after a long day of gathering information, Austin walked her back to her car, his gaze filled with the concern and affection that had grown between them. "Olivia," he began gently, "I know this is all overwhelming. You've been through so much." She looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. She was beginning to see Austin in a new light, not only as a friend, but as someone who truly understood her, someone who was willing to stand by her in her darkest moments. "Thank you, Austin," she replied softly. They stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Olivia could feel a warmth building, a quiet, comforting sense of love that felt both new and achingly familiar. She knew she was developing deeper feelings for him, a bond that went beyond friendship. Austin seemed to sense it too, though he kept a respectful distance, his gaze steady and unwavering. For now, he wanted nothing more than to protect her, to help her find her way out of the nightmare her life had become. And though he didn't say it aloud, he hoped that someday, when all of this was over, they could have a future together, a future free from the lies and betrayal that had surrounded her. The pieces were slowly coming together. Each day Olivia received updates from the private investigator, and each new detail solidified her resolve. She was prepared to expose Henry, Layla, and everyone else involved in the web of lies that had taken over her life. But nothing could have prepared her for the shocking revelation that would come next. One afternoon, the investigator called her for an urgent meeting. Olivia and Austin arrived at his office, where he greeted them with a somber expression. He gestured for them to sit, and when they were settled, he took a deep breath before speaking. "Olivia," he began, his voice tense, "what I'm about to tell you, it's something I uncovered after reviewing evidence and cross-referencing contacts Henry has maintained over the years. It's about your parents' accident." Olivia's heart skipped a beat, a sudden chill settling over her. "What about the accident?" she whispered, fear lacing her voice. The investigator leaned forward, his expression dark. "Henry and your cousin orchestrated it. Henry tampered with the brakes on your parents' car. They wanted access to the estate, and with your parents out of the way, the path to your inheritance became easier. I have recordings and documents that link them to the accident, and phone records that show Henry was working with your cousin all along." Olivia's world shattered. She felt as if the ground had been ripped from under her, her breath caught in her throat. The man she had married, the person she had trusted most, had not only betrayed her, but had been responsible for the deaths of her beloved parents. Her hands trembled as she tried to process the enormity of what she had just learned. Austin moved closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulder in a gesture of silent support. He could feel her pain, the deep sense of betrayal that went beyond anything she had imagined. Henry's deception ran deeper than she had ever realized, and now, knowing that her cousin was involved, only intensified the horror. This was all about money," Olivia murmured, her voice shaking. "They took everything from me, Austin. Everything." Austin squeezed her shoulder, his own expression hard with anger. "Olivia, we're going to make sure they pay for this. Every single one of them." Meanwhile, Layla's paranoia had begun to spiral out of control. Richard's confrontations had left her on edge, and she was now painfully aware that her carefully constructed alliances were beginning to fray. She knew Henry wasn't aware of her affair with Richard, but the weight of keeping her secrets was getting heavier by the day. Desperation gnawed at her, pushing her closer to a breaking point. When Richard cornered her at a secluded spot near the estate, she could feel her carefully constructed mask slipping. His eyes bore into her, and there was no trace of the affection he had once shown. "Tell me the truth, Layla," he demanded. "Did you ever plan to tell me about Henry?" Layla looked away, her face pale. I didn't mean to lie, Richard. I didn't expect things to get so complicated. Complicated? He snapped, his tone laced with bitterness. You've been using me just like you're using him. Do you realize what this will do to both of us if this comes out? Desperation flashed in her eyes as she turned back to him. I don't want any of this anymore, Richard. Henry, he's lost control, and he doesn't even know it. If we can get out now, we can leave him to clean up his own mess. Help me betray him. It's our only chance. Richard's expression softened slightly as he saw the panic in her eyes. He hesitated, weighing his options. Fine, he finally said, his voice low. But if you're going to do this, you'd better be sure. There won't be any turning back. Layla nodded, her gaze steely. She knew the risks, and she was willing to take them. In her mind, leaving Henry to face the consequences alone was the only path left. She'd do whatever it took to secure her freedom, even if it meant betraying the man who had once been her greatest ally. Back at the estate, Olivia began to set her own trap. She decided to host a grand celebration, inviting everyone who mattered in her social and professional circles: family, friends, prominent business figures. She knew that Henry's ego would lead him to attend with full confidence, unaware that the night would turn into his worst nightmare. The evening at Olivia's estate was grand, the elegant rooms filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. Friends, family, and prominent business figures moved about, admiring the stunning decor and the warm ambiance. No one sensed the storm about to break. Henry, dressed impeccably, moved through the crowd with his usual confidence, greeting guests and exchanging pleasantries. He believed tonight was his moment, his chance to assert complete control over Olivia's fortune. The forged documents he held in his hand would declare her unfit to manage her estate, securing everything for himself. He felt smug, certain that Olivia was none the wiser. As the evening progressed, guests gathered in the grand hall for a toast. Henry cleared his throat and stepped forward, raising his glass with a smile that barely concealed his self-satisfaction. Thank you all for coming tonight, he began, his tone smooth and practiced. As you know, Olivia and I have faced many challenges together. Tonight I want to address one of them with full transparency. Olivia has struggled, and for her sake and for the sake of this family, I believe it's time to discuss a new direction. A murmur spread through the crowd, guests looking at one another with surprise and confusion. Henry held up the documents. In light of recent events, Olivia has agreed to transfer full management of the estate to me. It's a necessary step to ensure her well-being and protect our family's legacy. Before he could continue, Olivia stepped forward, her calm yet authoritative voice cutting through the room. Actually, Henry, she said, meeting his gaze, there's something I'd like to share with everyone here. Henry froze, his smug smile faltering. Of course, darling, he said, attempting to mask his unease. Olivia turned to the guests, her gaze sweeping across familiar faces. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I've come to understand that not everything in my life is as it appears, and I believe it's time for some truths to be revealed. With a slight nod, Olivia signaled the private investigator, who stepped forward with a set of files and a small device. Over the past few months, I've gathered evidence of betrayal and deceit, all orchestrated by someone I trusted more than anyone else. Henry's face turned pale as Olivia pressed play on the device. The room fell silent as recordings filled the air. Henry and Layla's voices, caught in whispered conversations, discussing Olivia's inheritance, her mental unfitness, and their plans to remove her from the picture entirely. The guests listened in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of shock and horror. Henry's expression twisted with fury as he realized the trap he'd walked into, but Olivia wasn't finished. These recordings reveal that Henry and my supposed caregiver, Layla, have been conspiring to take control of my estate, she continued, her voice unwavering. They planned to declare me unfit, hoping I would never uncover their treachery. The guests murmured in disbelief, some casting disgusted glances in Henry's direction. Henry tried to salvage what little he could. Olivia, this is absurd. You know I've always had your best interests at heart. Layla and I were only ever working to protect you. But Olivia wasn't finished. She turned to Layla, who had been standing to the side, looking as if she wished she could disappear. And Layla, Olivia said, her voice sharp, I have one more revelation for you all. She signaled the investigator again, who displayed photographs and records of Layla's meetings with her secret lover, a wealthy businessman, entirely unaware of her involvement with Henry. The images showed them in intimate settings, confirming Layla's double betrayal. Gasps filled the room, and Layla's face turned ashen as her lover's name was revealed. Layla tried to stammer out a denial, but the evidence was undeniable, and she could see the disgusted looks on the faces of those around her. Olivia's voice was calm, but laced with quiet fury as she addressed the guests. These two people, who I thought I could trust, have conspired against me, against all of us. They plan to destroy everything my family worked for, motivated by nothing but greed. Just then, two uniformed police officers stepped forward, having been discreetly summoned earlier in the evening. Henry's eyes darted wildly around the room, his confidence shattered. This is a setup, he yelled, his voice tinged with desperation. Olivia, you can't do this. But his protests fell on deaf ears. The officers moved toward Henry, reading him his rights as they placed handcuffs around his wrists. Layla, too, stood frozen, unable to look at anyone, her face pale as she realized she was alone in her disgrace. The room watched in stunned silence as the officers led Henry out, his once proud demeanor reduced to that of a desperate man who had lost everything. Layla, left to face the glares of the crowd, made a hasty exit, disappearing into the night without a word. As the chaos settled, Olivia looked around at the guests, her expression calm and composed. She had reclaimed her life and her legacy, exposing those who had sought to take everything from her. A sense of peace washed over her, a peace she hadn't felt in years. Austin approached her, his eyes filled with pride and admiration. You did it, Olivia. It's over. She met his gaze, a grateful smile breaking through the sadness. I couldn't have done it without you. As the night drew to a close, Olivia knew she had reclaimed her life, free from the chains of betrayal that had held her down. She was finally ready to move forward, leaving the darkness behind and looking ahead to a future filled with trust, friendship, and perhaps a new beginning. The police station was cold and sterile, the stark walls and buzzing fluorescent lights adding a layer of harshness to the room. Olivia walked through the hallway, her heart pounding, but her face was set in determination. She had one last conversation to have with Henry, one final closure to bring the chapter of betrayal and pain to an end. A guard opened the door to the visitation room, where Henry sat in handcuffs. The once charming, confident man looked disheveled, his face a mixture of bitterness and rage. He glanced up as Olivia entered, his gaze hardening as he took her in. She sat across from him, silent, waiting for him to speak. You've been playing me this whole time, Henry spat, his voice filled with anger. You could hear me. You heard everything and you kept me in the dark. Olivia's lips tightened. Is that really all you can say, Henry? She replied, her voice cold. I married you, trusted you, and you repaid me with lies, manipulation, and murder. You don't get to be angry with me. Henry's eyes narrowed, his expression twisting with resentment. You tricked me. I would have succeeded if you hadn't played your little game. Olivia felt a chill run through her. The audacity in his tone was almost unbelievable. She looked him squarely in the eye, her own gaze hard and unflinching. You took everything from me. You killed my parents for greed, and you destroyed the trust I had in you. I know what you did, Henry. I know you and my cousin conspired together to sabotage their car. Henry's face paled, and for a brief moment she saw fear flash in his eyes, but he quickly masked it, his lips curling into a bitter smile. Well, what are you going to do about it now? Everything's out in the open and there's nothing left for you to win. Olivia took a deep breath, steadying herself. I came here to let you know that you will pay for what you did, and I'll make sure you rot in jail for the rest of your life. This is the end, Henry. She reached into her bag and pulled out a set of divorce papers, placing them on the table between them. Sign these. I want you out of my life. Henry's face contorted with anger, but he said nothing as she stood and turned her back on him, walking out of the room with her head held high. For the first time, Olivia felt the weight lifting from her shoulders, the painful chapter of her life with Henry closing as she left him behind, knowing justice would prevail. In the days that followed, everything continued to unravel for Henry. His allies abandoned him, horrified by his actions and unwilling to be associated with a criminal. His accomplice, Olivia's cousin, was also arrested, their schemes finally exposed for all to see. Henry was left to face his consequences alone, his carefully constructed life reduced to ashes. Layla, too, suffered the fallout. With Henry's influence and financial support gone, she was left humiliated and isolated, her life shattered. Richard, the man she'd tried to manipulate into her own scheme, abandoned her without a word, leaving her to bear the weight of her choices alone. She'd lost everything, and her reputation was forever tarnished. As the dust settled, Olivia returned to her family's estate, feeling both a sense of relief and the heaviness of all that had happened. She found herself wandering through the old rooms, the memories of her childhood mingling with the recent traumas. She was determined to rebuild, to honor her parents' legacy and the love they'd left behind. One evening, while sorting through some of her mother's old belongings, she stumbled upon a small, weathered envelope tucked carefully inside a jewelry box. Her mother's familiar handwriting marked the front. For Olivia. Heart pounding, Olivia opened it, her eyes misting as she unfolded the letter. Her mother's words filled the page, warning her of the dangers of greed, of trusting too easily, and of the importance of independence. There was a subtle warning woven within the lines, as though her mother had sensed something long ago, a hint of distrust regarding Henry. With the letter was a small brass key. Her mother's words explained its purpose. It was for a secured fund, a private inheritance set aside beyond the family's estate, ensuring Olivia's financial independence regardless of what happened to the family fortune. Her mother had been thinking of her even then, leaving behind something she would need when the time came. The reality of her mother's foresight struck her hard. Olivia clutched the letter to her chest, feeling a wave of grief wash over her. She had been so blind, so trusting, and in her innocence, she had let a man like Henry into her life, a man who had taken her parents away from her. The pain and guilt tore at her, and she broke down, sobs shaking her as the full weight of her loss hit her. Moments later, she felt a comforting hand on her shoulder. Austin had quietly entered the room, sensing her grief and standing by her side without a word. He knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around her, allowing her to lean into him, to find solace in his embrace. "It wasn't your fault, Olivia," he whispered, his voice steady and reassuring. "You couldn't have known. None of this is on you." Olivia looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. The depth of her grief laid bare. "I was so blind, Austin. I let him in, and because of that, my parents are gone. I failed them." Austin held her tighter, his hand gently brushing her hair. "You didn't fail anyone, Olivia. Henry deceived you and manipulated you, but you've shown strength that most people could never imagine. You've honored your parents by standing up for yourself and for their legacy." She looked into his eyes, finding comfort in his gaze, and felt her heart begin to mend. The ache was still there, but so was a new feeling, a warmth that spread through her, a sense of love that she hadn't felt in years. Austin's unwavering support, his gentle understanding, had been her anchor through the darkest moments. Without another word, he leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that was soft, yet filled with a passion that spoke of years of unspoken feelings, of a love that had quietly blossomed amidst the pain. They stayed close, letting the moment wash over them, both of them feeling the start of something new and deeply real. When they finally pulled back, Austin took her hand, his gaze filled with promise. "I'll always be here, Olivia. I'll stand by you no matter what." A faint smile tugged at her lips as she held his hand tightly. "Thank you, Austin, for everything." Together, they looked out over the estate, the weight of the past finally lifting. The future lay open before them, a future built on trust, strength, and the love that had quietly grown between them. Olivia knew she was ready to move forward, no longer haunted by betrayal but filled with hope for the life she deserved, a life with Austin by her side,